Karen Whitmore stood in her driveway at 6:47 am, arms crossed like a general surveying enemy territory, watching the ambulance screech to a halt 3 houses down. Without hesitation, she marched straight into the street, positioned herself directly in front of the vehicle, and held up her hand like a traffic cop. "Excuse me," she shouted at the bewildered paramedics. "Do you have proper HOA authorization to park that oversized vehicle in Willowbrook Estates?" The second shocking moment came when the lead paramedic, a burly man named Rodriguez, tried to explain they were responding to a cardiac emergency. Karen's response: she whipped out her laminated HOA rulebook, yes, she carried it everywhere, and began reading aloud. Section 12.4 clearly states that emergency vehicles must display proper resident identification stickers and cannot exceed the 15-minute parking limit in residential zones. The man's jaw dropped so far it nearly hit his clipboard. The third moment, that would soon become neighborhood legend, occurred when Mrs. Henderson, the cardiac patient's wife, came running out in her nightgown, screaming for help. Karen's reaction was to pivot smoothly on her sensible flats and inform the distraught woman that her lawn gnomes violated the tasteful outdoor decoration clause and would need to be removed within 48 hours. Emergency or not, Karen declared with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her own logic, rules are rules. This wasn't Karen's first rodeo as Willowbrook Estates' self-appointed guardian of suburban order. At 52, she transformed from a mild-mannered insurance adjuster into the HOA's most feared enforcer after her divorce 3 years prior. What started as therapeutic involvement in community governance had evolved into something resembling a personal crusade against chaos. "Ma'am, please step aside," Rodriguez pleaded, his voice tight with urgency. "Mr. Henderson is having a heart attack." Karen's grip tightened on her rulebook. Something flickered across her face. Was it doubt? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I understand your concern, but emergency vehicles parked in violation create dangerous precedents. What if everyone claimed emergencies to bypass our regulations?" The crowd of neighbors gathering on their front steps began murmuring, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Karen noticed their stares and felt a familiar surge of righteous energy. These people needed her structure, her vigilance. Without her, Willowbrook would descend into the same chaos that had consumed her marriage, her career, her sense of control over anything. "Look, lady," Rodriguez's partner interjected, "we can discuss your concerns later. Right now, we need to save a life, and I need to protect our community standards." Karen shot back, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Perhaps next time you'll call ahead for proper authorization." Mrs. Henderson's sobs grew louder. The neighbors' murmurs turned hostile. But Karen stood firm in the street, rulebook clutched against her chest like armor, creating a standoff that would define everything that followed. In her mind, she wasn't obstructing emergency services. She was preventing the complete breakdown of civilized society. What Karen didn't notice was her next-door neighbor Jimmy Chen, frantically recording everything on his phone, or the way the other residents were already texting furiously, spreading word of the confrontation. She also missed the calculating look in Rodriguez's eyes as he reached for his radio. The war Karen had declared on disorder was about to declare war right back. 20 minutes later, Karen stood in her pristine kitchen, hands trembling as she poured coffee into her world's most organized mug. Through her perfectly polished window, she watched a second ambulance, 2 police cars, and a fire truck create what she could only describe as a vehicular circus on her once orderly street. The doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who meant business. Karen smoothed her cardigan, grabbed her rulebook, and opened the door to find Officer Martinez flanked by what appeared to be half the neighborhood. "Mrs. Whitmore," Martinez began, his tone professionally neutral, "we need to discuss your interference with emergency medical services." "I prefer quality control," Karen replied, then immediately wished she hadn't. The words sounded ridiculous even to her own ears, but backing down now would validate every criticism ever leveled at her leadership. Jimmy Chen stepped forward, phone still recording. "Officer, she literally stood in front of the ambulance while Mr. Henderson was dying. It's all on video." Karen's carefully constructed composure cracked. He's not dying. Mrs. Peterson had 3 heart attacks last year that turned out to be acid reflux. These people cry wolf constantly. Ma'am, Martinez said quietly, Mr. Henderson is in surgery right now. Touch and go. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe, her rule book slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Around her, neighbors she'd sight happy for years watched with expressions ranging from disgust to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. I was protecting our community, she whispered, the words sounding hollow now. Mrs. Chen, Jimmy's elderly mother, stepped forward. Karen braced for another attack, but the woman's voice was surprisingly gentle. Karen, honey, when did protecting rules become more important than protecting people? The question pierced through Karen's defenses like nothing else could have. She thought about her ex-husband's final words during their divorce. You've turned our home into a prison, Karen. Rules without love aren't protection. They're walls. I don't, Karen started, then stopped. The truth was too terrifying to voice, that without her rules, her authority, her constant vigilance, she was just a lonely woman in a house too big for one person, surrounded by neighbors who saw her as the villain in their suburban story. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to come to the station. There will likely be charges filed. As Karen gathered her purse with shaking hands, she caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, rigid, brittle, breakable. When had she become this person? The crowd parted as she walked to Martinez's cruiser, and Karen realized this was the most attention she'd received from her neighbors in years. Not the kind she'd wanted, but attention nonetheless. As they drove past the Henderson house, she saw Mrs. Henderson returning from the hospital, supported by her daughter. Is he? Karen asked through the patrol car's window. Mrs. Henderson looked up, her eyes red but not as hostile as Karen expected. Stable. They think he'll make it. Karen nodded, unable to speak. As the patrol car pulled away, she saw something that made her heart tense. Mrs. Henderson's lawn gnomes, the ones she'd threatened that morning, had been joined by dozens more. The entire neighborhood had apparently brought their own gnomes in solidarity, creating a whimsical army of ceramic solidarity on the woman's front lawn. At the station, as Karen waited in a sterile room that smelled of industrial coffee and broken dreams, she found herself wondering, what if Mrs. Chen was right? What if all her rules and regulations had become walls instead of bridges? But even as doubt crept in, a stubborn voice in her head whispered that someone had to maintain order, someone had to care about standards. The question was, at what cost? Outside, storm clouds gathered over Willowbrook Estates, and Karen's phone buzzed with notifications she was afraid to read. Whatever happened next, she realized, her war for suburban order had just become something much more complicated. Something that might destroy the very community she'd spent 3 years trying to perfect.